In 1587, 118 English settlers landed on Roanoke Island. Their governor, John White, returned to England for supplies almost immediately, but a war with Spain forced a 3-year delay before he could set foot on the island again. White found the settlement abandoned. The houses had been taken down, and the word Croatoan was discovered carved into a wooden post. For 4 centuries, this has been framed as a supernatural mystery, a story of a colony that simply ceased to exist. However, looking at the records from the time suggests the settlers didn't just vanish. Instead, the details of their fate were likely obscured by the political and corporate interests of the era. By combining recent tree ring data, leaked spy documents, and underwater archaeology, researchers have developed 3 specific hypotheses that move the story away from myth and toward a series of documented events. The first hypothesis suggests the colony was broken by a sudden environmental shift that the settlers were completely unprepared to handle. Climatologists reconstruct historical weather by studying tree rings. This cross-section shows how trees grow less in dry years. Researchers found the years 1587 to 1589 were marked by the most extreme drought in 8 centuries. Settlers arrived exactly as resources failed. This wasn't a manageable dry spell. The data indicates a total collapse of local agriculture, likely leading to immediate starvation and the breakdown of the colony's social structure. This data reframes the disappearance. It suggests the colonists weren't victims of a mystery, but of a desperate struggle for survival during an unprecedented biological crisis. The second hypothesis explores the possibility of a violent ending, sparked by the English commander's own treatment of the indigenous population. Before the 1587 colony was established, Richard Grenville had already soured local relations. He ordered his men to burn a nearby village over a stolen silver cup, ensuring any future English arrival would be met with hostility. Historical accounts from the later Jamestown colony support a theory of retaliation. Captain John Smith and William Strachey both recorded reports that Chief Powhatan had personally ordered the slaughter of the Roanoke settlers. These reports, however, were notably absent from the Virginia Company's public advertisements. At the time, the company was trying to recruit new investors and families. Admitting the first colony had been massacred would have ended the venture. Evidence of this violence only surfaced centuries later in the Spanish archives. A map smuggled out of Jamestown by a spy named Zuniga reached the Spanish king, containing information the English public never saw. The Zuniga map specifically noted a site south of Roanoke Island where 4 surviving Englishmen were reportedly living under the protection of a rival leader. Physical evidence for this conflict appeared in 1937 with the discovery of the Dare Stones. While controversial, these artifacts are currently being re-examined by researchers using modern linguistic analysis. The stones describe misery and war, claiming a native attack left only 7 survivors. When placed alongside the Zuniga map, the mystery looks more like a localized conflict that was scrubbed from the company's official ledgers to protect their bottom line. If a conflict or a famine occurred, we still have to ask why no ruins or graves have been found on the island today. This leads to the hypothesis of geological erasure. The northern end of Roanoke Island is incredibly unstable. Since the 16th century, a quarter-mile of the coastline has been reclaimed by the sea. This isn't just a theory. Archaeologists have recently recovered 16th-century axe heads and the remains of a colonial-style well in the shallow water just off the current shoreline. The physical evidence of the colony didn't vanish into thin air. It was likely swallowed by the shifting geography of the coast. The fate of the 1587 colony appears to be a convergence of documented factors: a historic drought, aggressive diplomacy, and a receding coastline. While the story is frequently framed as a mystical event, the archival and geological records point to a series of specific, compounding failures. The narrative is built on the realities of corporate censorship, on the environmental pressures of the 16th century Atlantic coast. Roanoke is no longer an empty space in the record. It is a sequence of events that modern science and leaked history are finally resolving. In August 1590, Governor White found Roanoke Island deserted. The houses were dismantled, and a single word was carved into a palisade post: Croatoan. Because White found no graves and no physical wreckage, the event evolved into a 400-year-old fiction. It became a story of a colony that vanished into thin air, leaving behind America's oldest ghost story. However, modern researchers are increasingly looking past the supernatural folklore. Climatologists, archaeologists, and local tribes have begun to re-examine the data through a more practical lens. This new forensic record suggests the group executed a fragmented, pre-planned migration. It was a strategy designed to ensure the survival of the individual families, even if it meant the end of the English colony itself. To maintain the mystery of Roanoke, one has to overlook the specific physical and historical markers the colonists left behind, evidence that points to a very different ending. The crisis was born from a navigational error in 1587. The 115 men, women, and children were intended for the fertile Chesapeake Bay, but a privateering pilot forced them to disembark at Roanoke Island, a site with poor soil and little strategic value. This data, pulled from bald cypress tree rings, shows a precipitous drop in moisture levels starting the year the colonists arrived. It was the peak of an 800-year drought, one that crippled the local indigenous food supply and made English reliance on trade impossible. While the settlers starved, a geopolitical blockade locked them in. The Spanish Armada's threat to the English coast forced the Queen to seize every ship, preventing Governor White from returning with supplies for 3 years. Tensions with the local Secotan tribe had also reached a breaking point. Previous English military missions had been exceptionally brutal, leaving the 1587 settlers isolated in a landscape of famine and hostility. Facing drought and abandonment and total war, the group reached a breaking point. The mandate to build an English outpost was abandoned in favor of a desperate effort to stay alive. In 2012, a new investigation began at the British Museum, focusing on a 16th century map drawn by John White called La Virginia Parse. Researchers used multispectral imaging to look beneath a paper patch White had placed over a section of the mainland. Beneath that patch, they found the symbol for a fort located 50 miles inland at the confluence of the Chowan and Roanoke rivers. When archaeologists excavated this precise location, now known as Site X, they recovered shards of Elizabethan-era borderware pottery. Finding these domestic ceramics in the interior provides a material link to the 1587 families. Fragmentation was a tactical necessity. By breaking the 115-person colony into units of 3 or 4 families, they avoided overwhelming the limited food supplies of the Native American villages that took them in. The matching cartographic and archaeological evidence indicates that the move to the interior was not a chaotic flight, but a planned migration. The word Croatoan left at the fort was a literal forwarding address. It pointed toward the barrier island now known as Hatteras, the home of an allied indigenous tribe. Recent excavations within Native American village sites on the island have unearthed 16th century English writing slates and a 10-karat gold signet ring engraved with a lion, objects far too valuable to be simple trade goods. These items were found in cohabitation pits, where English artifacts and Native American refuse are intermingled in the same domestic layer. The presence of high-status English goods inside native longhouses suggests that the colonists became refugees. They did not build a separate fort. They integrated into indigenous society. The survival of the Roanoke settlers is documented in oral traditions of the modern Lumbee and Tuscarora tribes, describing the adoption of white, literate ancestors. Early observers of the Lumbee people noted linguistic anomalies, including a unique dialect that preserved Elizabethan English vocabulary well into the 18th century. Genetic genealogy reinforces this link. Surnames like Bertie, Brooks, and Dare, all present on the 1587 passenger manifest, persist within these modern tribal populations today. This was a result of the indigenous practice of adoption. Tribes depleted by war or disease frequently absorbed refugees to maintain their population strength and genetic diversity. The Roanoke colonists survived by trading their English identities for indigenous assimilation. They chose biological continuity over fealty to a crown that abandoned them. The mystery endured for centuries, largely because historical bias prevented scholars from accepting that English subjects would willingly go native. The evidence reveals Roanoke not as a failed outpost, but as America's first instance of European and indigenous cultural blending. By searching for a ruined English fort, we spent 400 years overlooking the living families born from its remnants.